That was one blow. The speaking of Hawaiian in the schools was outlawed. The hula was outlawed. Laws were passed, the Moekaloi laws were passed, that outlawed many of the practices in the social system, including the hanai system, where families would adopt children out to other families. You know, if my family has 3 children and your family have none, one of my children goes over to your house. That doesn't mean I give it up as my child. It's just that you don't have any children, you have an opportunity to raise children. That was the Hawaiian way. It was part of aloha. The community shared in everything. There were laws passed outlawing that. There were laws passed outlawing ancestral worship. It's sort of difficult to believe that people that came from the United States political system would think they could come over to Hawaii and destroy a religion and destroy religious practices like this, given the First Amendment. That's what happened. So all these actions of the destruction of the religious practice, the destruction of the social system, the suppression of the language, the suppression of the cultural aspects of the hula, and finally the overthrow of the queen, add up to basically an attempt by the Western civilization to destroy the Hawaiian civilization. And the Hawaiian civilization has suffered tremendously from that. The Hawaiian people have suffered tremendously on all the social indicators, health indicators, whatever. They're always at the bottom because they've lost everything that gave meaning to their life. Starting with the Apology Resolution in 1993, the efforts to restore the nation really took on an even greater impetus. More groups being formed, more plans being developed for how to move to reestablish the nation. The Kingdom Lands case at the Supreme Court this year has moved that even to another level. And there's a very powerful movement now in Hawaii to see to it that the Hawaiian civilization survives and thrives, and that brings sovereignty back into the Hawaiian Islands. And in order for that to happen, the Hawaiian people, and when I say the Hawaiian people, it's not just people of Hawaiian ancestry. An important point in this history is that what was overthrown in 1893 was a kingdom. And in that kingdom there were subjects who were of Hawaiian ancestry and non-Hawaiian ancestry. So it wasn't just people of Hawaiian ancestry who lost their nation. The people from other nations who had become subjects of the kingdom also lost their nation. So there's a push on to bring together a group that would stand for the kingdom and try and restore the kingdom. In order for that to happen, the people in Hawaii are going to have support from people around the world. The United States military is not looking forward to giving up their bases in Hawaii. For that national security side of the United States government, this is the forward base for the war with China, for the domination of the Pacific, for the domination of Polynesia, whatever, all those fourth age pursuits that they engage in. So to change the hearts and minds of the national security state is going to be a very interesting undertaking, and we're certainly working on it. But we will need the people of the United States to understand this history, understand why the people of Hawaii would want to be independent again, and to communicate to their elected leaders that they support Hawaiian independence. There's a lot of threads of what this Hawaiian independence can mean. The restoration of this particular kingdom, this particular civilization, brings back in very fundamental understandings about how things work on this planet. So I want to just touch on a little bit about the Temple of Lono and the teachings of the Temple of Lono. First of all, in the Hawaiian traditional system, there were 4 gods. Ku was the ocean, Kanaloa the sun, Lono the earth, and Kani the fresh water. Now the kahuna of the Temple of Lono, of this re-emerged Temple of Lono, will be quick to say they also had a concept of one God. One God exists when there is truth between 2 people. That's the teaching of the temple. The one God is present when there is truth between 2 people. It's got a lot in there to think about, and I'll leave it with you to think about. But the 4 gods are taught in this fashion. Ku is the ocean. Kanaloa the sun heats the ocean and the water vapors rise. Lono of the earth uses the electromagnetic field of the earth to form the clouds. The clouds go up the mountain and drop the fresh water, the rain, kani. And the rain goes back down the mountains, feeds the crops, feeds the rivers, and goes back to the ocean. And there's almost a legal imperative in that system, which is every drop that left the ocean and went up has a right to return to the ocean. So once you have this hydrological cycle and you understand it, you understand sort of how to survive on the planet. But these four gods form the foundation of the spiritual practice in Hawaii. And they were accepted as the foundation throughout the communities. From that foundation, each individual, each family, each household would have their own spiritual practice. So the altar in a household of a fisherman would look very different than the altar in the household of a farmer. They would have different things on the altar to call in the energies to support their particular undertaking. They were all united by the foundation of the four gods. The principal teaching from that foundation was that this earth is a gift to the human family. Nobody owns it. There was no private property in the Hawaiian ancestral system, in the ancient system. All of us are here on the planet to malama the aina, to take care of the land and the animals and the plants and the kai, the ocean, so that we pass it on as healthy and as vibrant and as diverse and prolific as it came to us. And that's a responsibility to 7 generations coming in the future. So this is a very profound way of living on the earth that many, many indigenous civilizations around the earth have very similar values. We are simply stewards of this earth. So one of the problems in the Supreme Court case was they were talking about who owned these lands. And from the Hawaiian traditional perspective, nobody does, so the question has no meaning. At the same time, they were talking sovereignty. Who is the government? Who is the ruler of this land? Well, from the Hawaiian traditional perspective, there were multiple sovereignties. There were the priests, there were the ali'i, the chiefs, and there were the people. They each had their own responsibilities for the stewardship and management of the civilization. And they each had their own separate kuleana. That was the responsibility. So there was a sovereignty in each of those groups. Now, one of the cases we're looking at right now, possibly filing in the near future, would say, okay, you've destroyed the kingdom government, and you've destroyed the whole social system. So the lands devolve back to the people, as they are now the ones that own the land. So one of the cases we're looking at is to go back into the courts and say, we want a declaratory judgment. Our plaintiffs are people descended from subjects of the kingdom. Their grandparents were subjects of the kingdom and were responsible for what went on in the kingdom. The plaintiffs will be people descended from those subjects. And what they will be asking the court for is a simple declaratory judgment. That title never passed from the kingdom to the provisional government. For a court to rule otherwise would be to turn the whole private property system that was brought to Hawaii by the Western civilizations upside down. Because it would say you can establish title to private property through theft. You can take private property through violence and then claim you have clear title. I don't think the courts are going to want to take that position. But I've seen courts take very strange positions, so you never know. That's a case that kind of highlights what's going on here. And I would like the lead plaintiff in that case to be a descendant of the subject of the kingdom who's not of Hawaiian ancestry. Because there's a constant effort to break those of Hawaiian ancestry off from the nation of the kingdom. So we have a bill pending in Congress called the Akaka Bill,